Welcome to Buildings and Beyond,
the podcast that explores how we can create a more sustainable built environment
by focusing on efficiency, accessibility, and health.
I'm Robb Aldrich.
And I'm Kelly Westby.
In this episode, I spoke with Les Bluestone with Blue Sea Development. Les has been a developer in and around New York City for about 40 years, focused on housing and really mostly affordable housing. I've worked with Les on a few projects going back like 20 years. But before this interview, I hadn't talked with him much about the history of affordable housing, going way back, his history, and really how affordable housing has changed over the decades. It really was quite interesting. A lot has changed in the past 40 years, as you might imagine. Much for the better, but not everything, according to Les, which we'll get into. So we talk a little bit about the history of affordable housing, also challenges unique to affordable housing as compared to market rate construction, and where he thinks we should be headed in the future. Here's my conversation with Les Bluestone.
When I started out in this business, I was in a family business, and we were doing market rate. And then in the early 80s, things were slowing down, or it looked like things were going to slow down. And the city was just forming this entity called the New York City Housing Partnership. And they were trying to find market rate developers to do affordable housing. The theory being is that the city had just come out of its near bankruptcy state in the late mid-70s. So the city had this huge quantity of in-rem properties that they had taken back during that period. And so they had all the land, the developers had all the know-how, and someone, Kathy Wild was the woman who started the housing partnership, had the idea that, you know, if you could partner the city and private developers together, that you would get production like hadn't been before. Up until that point, you know, anything that was developed as affordable housing, for the most part, was done by the federal government.
Ah, okay. Interesting. And was New York kind of a leader in that regard, or were other places doing it?
No, New York was definitely the leader. Yeah, there were lots of we gave lots of tours and lots of seminars to people from all over the country that you came to see what it was all about and how it worked. So yeah, it was a great program. It really was.
So it really was a success.
A huge success. Success, yeah. And it got modified over time. You know, it became so successful, the city decided that it shouldn't be run by a not-for-profit. It should be run by them, and they kind of took over the program, the concept.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. So, I guess then or now, what are the big differences between market rate and affordable development?
Well, back then, the differences were pretty huge. As I said, all affordable housing or anything that was subsidized was built by the federal government. And in New York City, you can spot those buildings a mile away. They were all built during this more or less the same period. And 8x8 brick was a common material that they used. They had a formula about the mechanicals, and they had a formula about the exterior and the windows. And so when you walk into these buildings, they look very similar, even though they may have been, designed by different architects. They had specs that they had to go by. Whereas the market rate, it was pretty much whatever was going on at the time, for better or for worse. When there was a lot of competition, the bar got raised, and in terms of the quality of the units, amenities and finishes, that sort of thing, that really kind of went up and down with the market.
Okay. And now, I mean, I guess affordable housing, have you shifted really pretty exclusively to affordable now, or you still do a mix?
No, we haven't done anything conventional in many, many years.
Okay.
Yeah, everything for decades that we've done is as affordable.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean that this program in right around 1980, I guess, was the start, and
Yeah.
never looked back.
No, I do look back. As government can be kind of a bear to deal with at times, and there were, the thought of buying a piece of land, building what you want to build, how you want to build it, without having everybody in the world, involved in it, is kind of a nice thought.
Gotcha.
A little public housing colonic, so to speak, and. So it would be nice to get back to that, I think, in time to time. But
Okay.
But I have to say that nothing special, but I do see the need for people to have their first homes and to have safe homes and affordable homes. So that's kind of in my fabric.
Gotcha. Do you do a mix of ownership and rental?
Yeah, we do both.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. And I mean, obviously, codes have standards have evolved for conventional buildings a lot. But what are the extra hoops you need to jump through when you're doing affordable? Or I guess it depends where the funding's coming from, I guess.
You're right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I have to say, though, the housing partnership, when it initially started, it was really just about getting the units out there, as many units as we could, because there was such a crisis. There still is, but there was back then too. And not a whole lot of attention was paid to mechanical systems and energy efficiency, and that's it. I mean, but that was, those were the 80s. That was not really high on everyone's radar. But it was, everyone back then, the world was a very different place. There was a huge boom going on in real estate where everybody with a shovel was a developer. And so the quality, kind of was all over the place. There were lots of people that got into it that shouldn't have gotten into it for lots of reasons. And then there were people that were in it that are still in it now and doing the right thing. But the city's involvement, and by virtue of the fact that the projects were they're city-owned land, they came with city or state subsidy, so they had the money, and they were issued by RFPs. So for a developer to get the project, we had to put together something that was going to make our project look better than maybe the 10 or 20 other projects that were submitted for that particular site.
Okay.
So there were lots of ways to do it, but what it created was a competition amongst the developers, and it ended up raising the bar. Slowly, it raised it on market forces, and then after a while, the city started putting in its own requirements into the RFP. So they raised the bar, statutorily.
Okay. And that's still the case?
Yeah, that's still the case. Very much the case. In fact, maybe a little too much the case now.
Okay.
There's always the city on, building housing is, it's a process. It's basically a math equation. It's a math problem. Here's your land cost, here are your development, your construction costs, here are your operational costs, and you have to put all those numbers together and come out to a place where it works. When those numbers start to get skewed either by market forces, such as shortages of material or huge increases or lack of labor, then what happens is, in order to build that same unit, the city has to come up with more money, or you have to reduce the cost some other way. So you're constantly moving these equations. But what's happened, there's been a big push now to sustainability and energy efficiency in the eyes of the city, and rightly so. However, there's always the rub is that, is it better to have 100 units at the absolute premium standard in efficiency and sustainability, or to have 200 units that's maybe at 60 or 70 or 80% of that gold standard?
So I've heard that before. Like, do we need to build affordable housing? Does it need to be the best? Does it need to be passive house? Does it need to be LEED Platinum? I have not. The margins I have heard are more in the 5% range. Like, do we need to spend 5% more to make super premium quality affordable housing, or can we make 5% more housing units that is really good affordable housing? But I mean, do you have a sense for kind of
that? Well, that 5%. The 5% is a moving number. I mean, that,
Sure.
5% in good times, when all of a sudden there are tariffs on everything that comes into this country and labor is not available, and you're dealing with, construction a la COVID, that 5% is not 5% anymore. It's now it's 10% or 15% or 20%. There was a period, I can remember, when all of the plywood that was being this is going back some decades, but I can remember that all of the plywood that was being manufactured in the United States was going to China, because China was in such a growth spurt and they had so much demand that the manufacturers could get, so much more money for it in China than in the U.S. that it was like almost impossible to get a piece of plywood, and the prices were absolutely crazy. So those things still happen, those kind of commodity. Right now we have huge lumber tariffs. The government just imposed aluminum tariffs on Canada as well, coming from Canada. So, it's that number, the 5%, is constantly moving. So but the requirements of, the people that are running these housing programs don't always account for that. And, we want what we want and we want it now, and, don't really always understand, the effects.
But is that a new issue, or is it maybe exaggerated now, or it's just the?
It's just. I think their appetite has increased.
Okay.
I think they wanted what, the government always had, its requirements. They're putting in the land, they're putting in the money, and rightfully, they should get what they want out of it. But I think with the dawning or the awakening of people's sustainability consciousness, the government has jumped on that bandwagon and is now kind of gone over the top in some ways at some points in time. And this changes, by the way, from administration to administration. The other thing to throw into that mix is that every 4 to 8 years, you take the deck of cards and you throw it up in the air and start all over again, because there's a new set of elected officials that'll each with a different agenda and each with different priorities. So there's not as much flexibility in my mind in government to account for what's going on in the world. We want what we want, and sometimes they can get it because they can find the financing, the subsidies. But I mean, like I said, we have to guarantee rents if we're renting an apartment. We can't raise it a penny to account for any increase in costs, regardless of what they are. So if the costs go up from over a period of time, then the government has to usually make up the difference, because there's no simple other way to do it.
Interesting. Okay. So I think a lot of the regulators, a lot of the agencies, a lot of the funding organizations are starting to tie or institute some programmatic requirements. And you've done a lot. I think it was just about 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was just about 20 years ago when I started working for Stephen Winter Associates. One of the first projects I worked on was one of yours, Melrose, one of the Melrose projects in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was one of the first Energy Star affordable projects in the
It was
city, state.
The first in the state.
Okay. Yeah, and you've done many more since. You've done certainly LEED buildings and enterprise, green communities, passive house. I think you said you were working on.
We're working
passive
on
house.
a passive house building now. Yes.
Okay, so you're not a stranger to many of these programs.
No.
What are a couple of the real innovations, program-wise, that resulted in better buildings? And then also, what are the couple big stumbling blocks or annoyances that are just really hard to meet, or require a lot of money, or require a lot of effort or coordination?
I think getting back to basics has probably been, in my mind, the best way, to improve the quality and improve the efficiency. The technology, as with all technology, is, gets issued and gets put out there, maybe 10 years before we really understand how to use it. Or we understand what its good points and bad points are. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've used new products that are, everybody said were the best and this and that and so much better than that and so many less problems, and then 5 years later, oh, well, yeah, those systems are old. We don't use that anymore because it had all these problems. And so there we are with, buildings that were built that way. So that, but that, that kind of progression is not uncommon, but it was happening, and it still is happening so fast and furious that no one's really, there's no time to think or to get real track records. Everyone just throws these concepts and products to market and expects everyone to adopt them, and the government buys into a lot of hook, line, and sinker without really getting tested and proven. Not a lot of data sometimes.
Is there an example that you can cite without besmirching somebody?
Roofing systems, boiler controls. You name it. I'll give you one basic thing. We used to use regularly for all of our rental buildings that were hydronically heated. We used to use these big cast iron sectional boilers. And then somebody said, that's really old. You really shouldn't be doing. You should really be going with modular boilers, right? So we went, and everybody shifted over to modular boilers, smaller. The thinking was that they were smaller boilers, and you link them up in series, and so they would come on one after the other as demand required. So, except that years later, it was found out that in fact you're running all this water through the modular boilers, and it's acting as a huge heat sink and sending all the heat up their modular chimneys, and it really wasn't such a good idea after all. But there are thousands and thousands of buildings that use that system, and we certainly did too. That's one example.
Yep. Cool. So on the back to basics example, I remember one of the first, ventilation being mandated as part of Energy Star 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember, certainly in your buildings and many other buildings, Energy Star required us to actually test how much air was coming through ventilation systems.
Right.
Which was a novelty. It was, for me, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, but a lot of the builders, a lot of developers, we'd put our flow hood up to a register and we'd say, hey, you're supposed to be getting 60 CFM, you're getting 12. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the kind of examples of programmatic that I felt was pretty effective. I mean, do you are there things like that that's kind of changed your standard practice?
The ventilation certainly is an eye opener. The ventilation it's now so before we had the ventilation was totally unregulated, so to speak. It was, it was designed for by engineers. Depending on how it got installed, or depending how good the design was, it either worked or it didn't work. Usually didn't work. So now we test it. Now it's required to go through, much more rigorous design. And then now we bump against the code because the energy efficiency standards all say it should be this, and the code says it should be that. And so this is a problem that we're now running against. But as far as, other things that we that have changed the way we do business or the way we build, I have to say, there's a saying, and I say this to people, when people say, well, they don't build them like they used to. And my retort is always, it's a good thing that they don't.
Okay.
But so take Energy Star. In fact, it was on that same project that you started on, where Energy Star started requiring combustion gas testing. In fact, they did not start. This is a great story, which I'm sure you'll remember. It was not a requirement when we signed and got certified, signed on and got certified for that development for Energy Star. And then all of a sudden, after the project was complete, we heard that the NYSERDA, who was administering Energy Star in New York State, was going back to the houses unbeknownst to us and contacting the owners directly. This was an ownership project, and going and testing all the gas appliances in the house, the water heater, the boiler, the stove. And we got very upset because this was not part of our agreement, and to go and do this, and they were coming back with results that were scaring some of the homeowners. They were saying that their carbon monoxide levels were much higher than should have been allowed. Now, we're buying boilers and appliances from national manufacturers. We're not building them in our backyard. So we kind of just assume that these national manufacturers are doing the right thing. Well, so we call, in fact, in that particular job, I think it was GE was the ranges that we used. We called GE and told them what had happened, and they sent a technician down, and they went through every single house and adjusted every single burner and every single oven to get them to conform to the carbon monoxide levels that were required. And we said, well, God, okay, then we're glad we got through that, and now they're safe, and we're never going to do that again. We're never going to use GE gas appliances again. And then we went to another job, and we went, I think it was Whirlpool, and this time we knew about the requirement, so we had them tested, and again the same thing. The levels were off the charts, and at that point we got them.
And we're talking about ovens, right? The ranges or
the ranges in the ovens. Yes, correct. Yeah. And so then the boilers were pretty much all the boilers and hot water heaters were pretty good. There was really no issues with those. It was really just the kitchen, the cooking appliances. So when we got through Whirlpool, they too sent someone down. They fixed everything, and we said, look, we got them fixed this one time. What's going to happen with these things in 5 years from now when we're not around and no one's monitoring them? And they said, and we said, my partner and I just said to each other, let's stop this, and we shifted over at that point to electric ovens and electric stove. Just this way we would not have to worry. It's not as energy efficient as the gas, or cost effective, I guess. And some of the cooks, were not too thrilled that they didn't have gas in their homes as opposed to electric. But at the end of the day, we didn't have to worry. And, we were making our homes tighter and tighter as a part of this requirement, as a part of all the requirements from the different programs, those different certifications. So, this let us sleep at night and knowing that at least we weren't contributing to, the indoor air quality issues.
And you were ahead of the curve on that regard, because electrification is all the rage now.
Yeah.
A lot of programs are actively discouraging fossil fuels of any kind in homes.
Yeah, and it actually is much more expensive, but it is more expensive to do than to to run it. First of all, electric appliances cost more than gas appliances do. There's just more stuff in them, I guess, and to increase the electric service and run the cables to carry the loads for these appliances, is a big increase, whereas with gas it was not. So there's a case in point also where now we're all going to electrification, which is great. It costs more. Something's got to give.
To be fair,
no matter what it is, but something's got to give.
Yeah, and on the electrification front, if you go all the way and you don't have any fossil fuels on site, now you're saving money.
Correct.
And I've heard a lot of developers who get it. As the loads get smaller and smaller. Yes, an electric system like a heat pump or something might cost a little bit more to operate, but if the loads are low to begin with, and you don't have that infrastructure cost, you don't have the health and safety concerns of combustion. It can make a lot of sense.
The tighter you make. I mean, look, the amount of heat that's put off by the refrigerator and your big screen TV and your computer monitors and even your laptops, that little fan blowing out of the side, right? You could probably heat an apartment or a house with those things.
Yeah. And on the ranges, I've heard you mention, we chatted a little bit about induction. I mean, that's kind of the high-end electric range.
Yeah.
But that's a challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge for the population that we serve. Our homes are going to low and moderate income families, and there's two. One is, the education piece is getting people to understand that they have to use cookware out of certain materials and they can't use other types of cookware, and causing them to have to maybe go out and buy a new set of pots and pans and utensils, and that's problematic. In fact, I'll give you another little. So here's a technology that really did work and that really helped us. One of the requirements very early on was programmable thermostats back in the day, right? We used to have just a basic thermostat, and now everybody had to have digital programmable thermostats. Well, I would say for the first 10 years, maybe 15 years that we were using them, probably the biggest heating complaints that we had were people who were trying to program their thermostats and couldn't do it right, and it was just screwing up everything. The heat would go on, it would come off, it would be the wrong temperature. They couldn't figure it out. So then we ended up, and it was, we had to use them, so we would program the thermostats for people as best we could. But then we ended up shifting over to Nest thermostats, and the callbacks just disappeared overnight.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just absolutely disappeared. They were very simple to use. They were not, because of the self-programming feature, the algorithms, no one had to set any buttons or times or dates. They could just set the thermostat the way that they liked to use it, on and off, and then the thermostat would remember it, combined with its occupancy sensor built in, would set the temperatures to the right temperatures for them at the times that they needed it. And it was really a great thing. We'll never go back to a conventional thermostat, that's for sure.
That's interesting. I can sympathize. I mean, when I was out in the field doing lots of ratings, doing testing, I often would have to sit and figure out how to set the thermostat. It would take 10 or 15 minutes to puzzle through the, exactly. Press this and that. And So on the sustainability side, on the energy efficiency side, I'm suspecting that the homeowners or the tenants probably don't care that much about the labels, about certifications. Is that accurate, or am I off base?
It's a mix. There are some people that come at it and they're really excited about it. Some are very knowledgeable, which is kind of encouraging. Some are not knowledgeable, but they've heard about it, and the fact that their home is something that's beneficial to the environment is makes them happy. So, and then
Cool.
and then there's a group of people that really could care less.
Okay. Okay. But it sounds like I mean, a lot of the program work or a lot of the certifications come from agencies that are providing funding. Is that fair? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. One thing that we do now to help encourage or to educate as well, is we do walkthrough. Well, first of all, we produce a manual for each tenant or each homeowner that talks about the whole building, talks about how it was built, talks about the features that make it maybe different than other buildings, and talk about sustainability, indoor air quality, green living, as they say, and teach them a little bit as much as we can. And then we walk through the apartment and the building with them, pointing out the features. We found in the past that when we gave people information, that it usually got filed and no one ever opened it up until we said, "Did you open it up?" When they call about some issue. So when we found that when we take people through and show them an aerator, take the aerator off, show them the flow without the restrictive aerator, show it to them with it, and explain why that's an important thing, it imprints on their minds, and they have that image, so that when it comes up later on, they understand it. And they said, "Oh yeah, he told us about that," or yeah. And it also gets people interested a little more in just about general environmental issues.
Do you do that with tenants as well as homeowners?
Yeah, we do it with every tenant. Yeah.
Cool. Is there, with the COVID situation, are you seeing a heightened interest in indoor air quality, health and safety?
Yeah, in fact, I was on 2 webinars yesterday. One about designing buildings for seniors with COVID in mind, and then another one about a standard called Fitwell, about a viral component to their certification.
Gotcha.
But so there is definitely, people are looking at it. And getting back to your original point, one of the first pieces of the puzzle is about ventilation.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So in the city, most of the projects, if not all, that I've worked on with you have been in New York City. I mean,
New York
some
City
in
area.
Long Island, I believe.
Some in Westchester, some in Long Island, yes.
I was always impressed. I'd be driving to the Bronx with my car full of blower doors and stuff. I mean, you run a pretty tight ship, and a lot's got to go right. And what are the big challenges? I mean, doing major construction in the city, or maybe you don't have much to compare it to, but if you compare it to Westchester or compare it to Long Island, I mean, what are the extra logistics? What are the extra hoops you have to jump through to do work in the city?
If you're talking about the same affordable housing, government-sponsored type construction, in terms of regulatory, well, the state has its set of requirements, so the towns have their set of requirements that you have to meet. And they tend to be a little more navigable than the city's requirements, I would say, or that you can approach them with some of these issues that I've just mentioned, conflicts and things that need to be resolved. The city is much more difficult to get through to someone who can make the decision about is this yes or no. But that being said, I have to say, in all fairness to the city, it depends on who the people are, more so than even the administration. Who's sitting there behind the desk in the building department, or the Department of Environmental Protection, or whoever it is that you get lucky enough to get, can make all the difference in the world. We did a building in the Bronx called Arbor House, where we have a hydroponic farm on the roof of the building. It's a residential building. And there were all sorts of reasons by code that why that can't happen. Some is about zoning, some had to do with fire egress. And so but we wanted to do it. It's something that we had wanted to do for a while. So we went to city planning. We prepared all our answers to the questions which we knew that they would bring up. And we had, sheaths of material and waiting for them to ask the questions or to say it was, you can't do this. And when we got there, at planning, the people were so cooperative and loved the idea and were so helpful that we told them what we were concerned about, and they said, "No, that's not really an issue. You can do that. And here's how you do that." And then so we got through the planning thing, and we were dumbfounded. And then we went to the building department, and we got a deputy commissioner to meet with us. And we talked, we had this rooftop farm, and one of the things is you have to provide egress in a multifamily building to the roof for fire and access for the firemen to come in from the top. And, again, we were concerned about how would they treat this situation, and it was the exact same situation. We lucked out again, and the commissioner who we met with, she said, "No, if you do this, this, and this, you'll be fine." And that doesn't happen very often. But it more to the point is just about, regardless of whether it's the city or outside the city, it's really about who's sitting behind the desk that you speak with.
Interesting. Was that the building where you tried to do the CSA that kind of fell flat?
Yeah,
I think you said.
Yeah, it did fall. Well, it's still going. Actually, it's been revived.
Oh, cool.
But yes, yeah. The CSA fell flat. We tried to provide fresh produce to the low income families that were in the building, and we spent a lot of time and effort to get them to accept the government food stamp programs, the EBT program, so that they could use that source of funding that they got, some of them, to buy it. Well, it turns out that most of the people had not really grown up with fresh produce, in that particular community, so they really hadn't developed a taste for it or didn't know what to do with it. And then the other group, maybe were working 2-3 jobs to just try and make ends meet, and they were, looking for something just that they could throw in the microwave and, heat up between the times that they worked and the times they were home.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, that was a real eye opener for us, for me personally, anyway.
Yeah, man. So, looking ahead, if we talk again in 5 years, what do you think we'll be talking about? What do you think the big changes will be? Or 10 years?
One of the things that has had many, first of all, the envelope of the building. I mean, that should really be not all, but what we're really focusing on. If I had to say where the money should be going, it should be going to the envelope, always.
Okay.
The systems come and go, like the boilers I mentioned, and everything else, the appliances you can swap out, and the controls, the same thing. You can take out one set of controls and put in a new set. But the building shell is forever. So let's spend that money on something that's passive, that you don't have to really do anything to it, and try and build something that's as durable as possible, so that the maintenance is, de minimis. And then whatever technologies come along, they come along. And if we want to adopt them, we adopt them. If we don't, we don't. But the building at least has that going for it, is that the loads are reduced and the comfort is increased because of the building shell.
Yeah. Back to basics. That's one of the first things you said.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think that I also see is it's had a number of false starts is modular. I still see a lot of potential for modular building, and there are a lot of stumbling blocks. There's a lot of acceptance that still needs to happen on behalf of the financing community, even the city sometimes. But the building something in a controlled environment is just so far superior to building something out in the field. I mean, I grew up. I started working in construction, and I was a laborer, and then I was a construction superintendent. And I can remember, I mean, too many months and years of standing there freezing my butt off, my fingers, numb, teeth chattering, and watching, all the trades doing their job in the same state as I was.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to keep yourself warm, or the converse is, it's 100 degrees out, you're sweltering, you're trying to keep yourself cool, and you're moving at half speed, stuff happens. The quality just has to be affected by that. And also, not to mention the weather, right?
Yeah.
We build these buildings. They're wide open. You're getting rain, snowed, poured upon, and then you close them up, and you have rain and snow still in your building while you're building it. It's not a good situation.
Yeah, we've worked on a lot of modular projects, and I agree. There's huge potential there. It has its own set of challenges, but there really is big potential.
We've been doing panelized buildings, so most for the last 15, 20 years actually, and we like that system a lot because getting back to the cold, I don't have to worry about a mason, freezing his fingers off while he's trying to set a full cross-joint brick that I have to then worry about, is it going to leak? Is it not going to leak? So we like that. We also have been using modular bathrooms, and the quality of that bathroom is so much better than what we could ever build in the field. I mean, aside from the finishes, one of the things that concerned us was the air testing, because we have to do the air infiltration tests for each unit or for the building, a sampling of the units. And in many apartments, we have bathrooms that are back to back. And so that bathroom is our only barrier to, a tight apartment. And so we made the manufacturer do blower door tests of the bathroom in the factory and have them certified by an outside agency. And the last job we did, the guy could not even get a reading on his blower door test. So, now I could never build that in the field, ever.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a great thing.
Excellent. Thanks, Les. Any last thoughts?
Well, I mean, you could get me going pretty easily. You know which buttons to push if you want, but I just, there's no genius to what we do. It's just about people wanting to do the right thing, and people letting people do the right thing, encouraging them to do the right thing. I'm more of a fan of a carrot than a stick. I think a lot of the requirements in code issues that are now being discussed, can be kind of draconian, and I don't think, again, people are really thinking about the effects of them. Housing is a crisis situation, and when you make things really difficult and you make things impossible to meet the need, then what happens is people take shortcuts. People will scrimp someplace else to be able to do that. Or they'll go someplace else and build where it's easier. And meanwhile, the housing doesn't get built and the people still are in need. So I think moderation is always, Julia Child said it best, about moderation including the case of moderation.
Moderation in all things.
Yes, including moderation.
Including moderation.
Yes. So there are times when you really want to go full out, but I think from my mind is getting people into decent, affordable housing that, is not doing harm or is doing maybe less harm than the housing that was built last week. Is always a good thing, and getting more people into that housing because the demand and need is so high that some of the choices that have to be made, I'm willing to make in that favor.
Great, makes sense. We'll see in 5 years. We'll see we'll see where you get.
Check back with me when I'm retired, I hope.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Okay, Rob, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening, and thanks again to Les. Some more info about what we talked about is on our show notes page, swinter.com. That's swinter.com/podcasts. Buildings and Beyond is produced by Stephen Winter Associates. We are focused on making buildings better in many ways, in more ways, actually, as time goes on. Check us out at swinter.com. Check out our careers page if you are interested. We have positions in maybe all of our offices, DC, New York City, Connecticut, and Boston. And thanks to the podcast team here, Heather Breslin, Jade Alvarez, Kelly Westby, Dylan Martello, Alex Mirable, and I'm Rob Aldrich. Thanks for listening.